up, I used to regret that Daddy never told us he loved us. I think my daddy never learned how to show love, like a lot of people, because of his upbringing and him being an only child. Back in 1987, when he had triple bypass heart surgery, I went to see him in intensive care. He had tubes sticking out all over him, and he was still groggy from the heavy sedation. Squeezing his hand, I leaned over to him. I explained that I had to get to a show in Chattanooga, Tennessee the following night. In a faint voice, he said, "Okay, I love you, honey." That was the only time I ever heard him speak those words to me or to anyone else. I never knew how abnormally rough my childhood was until I went home with other kids. Most of my friends had time on their hands to play with toys and things like that. The only time we got out of work was when we went to school. When I came home, I took my school clothes off and put on my everyday clothes to get to work. Mostly, I wore hand-me-downs, either from my cousins or my sister. The only time I received new clothes was at Christmas time. Our one big luxury was a color television, which we got when I was 12. I'll never forget how excited I was. That TV became a nighttime entertainment center at our house. We would vote at the start of the week what shows we were going to watch on which nights. The majority ruled. We made a list and posted it above the heating stove. Believe me, no child today has ever enjoyed a video game more than we enjoyed our 19-inch television that received only 2 channels. Being normal kids, we were full of mischief. Next to the barn, for instance, was a shed where Daddy kept his sick yearlings. We'd tie a rope to the rafters on the barn, and Alice and Pake would swing from the top of the shed over the haystack. At the height of their swing, they'd let go and fall into the mountain of loose hay. I always wanted to try doing things like that, but never had the courage. When I was 10, I stood on top of the shed and braced myself for the swing, but I was simply too scared. I never did take the plunge. That was the McEntire version of bungee jumping 25 years ago. I wasn't ashamed of being chicken. I felt it was a smart thing to do, not to get hurt. There are many natural perils growing up in the country. The ever-present wasp, the spring tornadoes that would send us running to the cellar in the dead of night, and snakes, which were a constant fear. In Oklahoma, rattlers grow to a frightening size. Okeen, Oklahoma, 168 miles from Chalky, hosts the world's largest hunt every spring. An average of 1,000 pounds of snakes are picked off the ground in 3 days' time. Some of them are longer than 7 feet. Our hired hand, Louis Sandman, once killed a rattlesnake that was 6 feet long, holding a live rabbit in its mouth. More often than not, there was a lot of fun and laughter coming out of that house in Chalky near Limestone Gap. I recall how Mama had a pink phonograph record player, a Motorola, and a 45 of the Singing Nun singing Dominique. Now, Susie and I couldn't understand a word of French, but my folks had this big dresser in their bedroom with a big old mirror. We'd stand in front of it using their hairbrushes as microphones, and we'd lip-sync the song. And once a week, the 4 of us would come parading down the hall in our pajamas, dancing and singing to the music of 77 Sunset Strip while it was coming on TV. All the time careful not to let our bare feet touch the hot floor where the furnace was. That was our idea back then of a pre-game show. But I especially remember several New Year's Eves when friends and family came from miles around to dance in our brand new living room, a large room built onto our house with money Mama and us kids had saved. Mama put back money from work. Uncle Peck, Grandpap's brother, had given each of us kids a heifer calf when we were little, so that when the calves grew up and had babies, we could sell them. We did just that, and it was our decision to put the money into the living room account. On those New Year's Eves, someone would bring a guitar, another a fiddle, but everyone was required to either bring a pie or a pint of whiskey, of course. Nobody got out of line. There were kids everywhere. I watched those people play music, sing, and dance until daylight, and we sang along too. If someone got sleepy, he could pull up a piece of the floor to sleep on. It was straight out of the Waltons. Special times like these make me realize that music has always been a huge part of my life. Since my daddy rodeoed a lot, naturally we went with him a lot. Some of my fondest memories are those trips my family made to rodeos. At night, Susie and I would sleep on each side of our green Ford's hump on the back floorboard, while Peg slept on the shelf under the back window, and Alice got the seat. Of course, she was the oldest. Going down the road in the dark, listening to the hum of the highway, with our parents in front, was a magical and safe feeling. Sleep and security came easily. But often we'd get jolted out of that peaceful sleep. In those days, there were no interstates, so we'd be traveling on 2-lane highways that passed through small towns. When we'd come up on a red light, the heavy horse trailer we were pulling, which had no brakes, would bump up against the back of our small car, when Daddy would try to stop. And so Peg would fall off the shelf onto Alice, and then both of them would wind up on top of me and Susie sleeping on the floor. You can just imagine the commotion that caused. Our daytime rides had their share of wrestling, too. We were spirited children, and when boredom and restlessness set in, we could get bad about fighting, scuffling, and "don't touch me," and "Peg did that," and "Mama Peg did this." So when Daddy had had enough of it, which wouldn't take very long, he'd let his arm fall from across the back of the front seat and pinch whichever kid he made contact with first. So Mama would get us singing to keep us occupied, teaching us 3-part harmony and songs like "Please Mr. Custer, I Don't Want to Go" and "I'm So Lonesome Every Day." I can date the start of my professional singing life to a rodeo trip we took to Cheyenne, Wyoming when I was 4 or 5 years old, and we were staying at the Edwards Hotel. One afternoon while we were in the lobby, one of the cowboys asked Peg to sing him a song. Peg sang "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog" and got a quarter for it. Not wanting to be left out, I got up and sang "Jesus Loves Me." Everett Shaw, our family friend and former world champion steer roper, paid me a nickel. Back then was just like today. The girl singer does as much work as the guy, but she gets less money for it. I've been fighting that all my life. Rodeos were always a major source of fun for us, but we not only watched them, we learned a lot of the skills too. All the time I was growing up, there was at least one of us at the roping pen. Peg would be roping, either team roping, steer roping, or calf roping, and Alice would be practicing running barrels or poles. Barrel racing is where the horse runs as fast as he can, and then stops as fast as he can, turns a barrel, then accelerates as fast as he can, and then does it twice more. 1,500 pounds of horse flesh sitting on 4 ankles not much larger than a man's tries to hurl itself and rider around barrels 3 feet in diameter. I started running barrels when I was 9. Alice won lots of all-around trophies at the quarter horse shows. She had so many she used them as doorstops. Rodeo is simply in the blood of our family. By the time I was 11, I was competing. I would go on to run barrels until I was 21 years old. I was competing in about 50 rodeos a year after I got out of high school. Looking back, though, I think I was an embarrassment to Daddy because I never did that well on the rodeo circuit. I was better in the practice pen than I ever was in competition. It's a wonder that I lasted as long as I did, that I never got hurt. I'd always get so nervous before a competition that I had to struggle to keep from throwing up. I've never been that nervous about singing, even when I've sung for millions of people on primetime international television, such as the Academy Awards. But I still get a few butterflies when I sing the national anthem or sing at an award show in front of my peers. And it used to get me when Mama, who is still my biggest critic, was in the audience. But now that I'm a mama myself, I realize that she'd love me regardless of how I did. Daddy would too. Everyone has special milestones in his or her life, such as their wedding day or their high school commencement. One of mine was my first day at school. On that big morning, my shoes, clothes, and the rest of my attire were placed neatly in a line on the back of the couch in the living room so that I could get dressed close to the old brown heating stove. I wanted to be warm while I slipped from my pajamas into my clothes. The warmth I felt was probably no more than sheer excitement. We didn't have kindergarten in the Kiowa public school system, so my primary education began in the first grade in 1961. In a way, first grade was the real beginning of my performing career. It marked the first time I ever sang behind a microphone. During a Christmas program held in the Kiowa High School gymnasium, I sang Away in a Manger. At the 4-H Club Share of the Fun show, I sang my Sweet Little Alice Blue Gown and won first in the junior individual act division. It was my first trophy. The victory made me like a hunting dog. I had tasted blood and now knew deep within my very soul that I was to be an entertainer. Besides that, I recognized that singing was the best way to get attention. I wasn't the oldest child in the family, nor the youngest, not even the only boy. I was the third child, so the only other way I could get noticed was to make trouble, but that was definitely not the kind of attention I was looking for. By the time I got to junior high school, Paige, Susie, and I were singing more and more together around our house. Sometimes we were the entertainment when Mom and Daddy's friends came over to play dominoes. Alice didn't join us much back then. She was mostly concentrating on her barrel racing.